It's a grocery cart aisle. All right, thanks everybody. Obviously, hopefully you're in here to hear my talk about cleanup on aisle APT. Real quick, who am I? My name is Mark Parsons. I am a threat intel analyst. I do a little bit of the development on the side. More importantly, I'm a husband and a father, 3 wonderful kids. I am a huge solar power enthusiast. I'm actually looking forward to the talk after this, where the guy's going to talk about some stuff with solar power inverters. I'm also a burner owner. I can't not have a presentation with my dog on it. I am sad that I had to follow Rob Lee. That's hard to follow up on. For people that follow him or his organization, his new chief of threat intelligence, Sergio, has been driving across the country and has been taking pictures of SCADA systems and tagging them on Twitter with ICS across America. So I wanted to pay homage to that. I'm a solar enthusiast. This is my solar panel array on my house. So the purpose of this talk, you may not get it from the definition about cleanup on aisle APT, but what I've been doing is I've been purchasing nation-state related domains after they expired, and I've been syncing them. But before I go into that, I want to talk a little bit about what is a sinkhole. Does anyone here know what a sinkhole is? Sinkhole. Yep, so something like that. So that happened here in Baltimore recently. I think this is the actual street it happened on. But what I'm actually talking about is from a network perspective. So I'm talking about a DNS sinkhole. And I want to talk about it from an enterprise or a network defense standpoint. And basically what it is, it's a custom DNS configuration that allows you to take over domains. By take over, I mean you can tell your DNS resolvers to say, I am the authoritative zone for these zones out on the internet. I don't want my systems to get routed to it. So you basically man in the middle DNS out on the internet and say, none of these domains my clients can go to. So the idea behind that is if you're using bind, you can use RPZ. I think certain DNS hardware components can do that, or you can use custom zones. You basically say, hey, I'll use dynedns.com or dynedns.net. Make that a zone. You say, I own it. Any DNS requests go over to this IP that I own. And then that way you can mitigate things like dynamic DNS. If you see a report from a threat intel company, you can say, oh, we don't want any traffic to these domains. Sync them, point them at your own infrastructure. That way you can also stand up listeners, and you can say, oh, hey, why is someone beaconing to my sinkhole? A previous job, we had this, and we actually found one of our web servers was getting hacked because an external web server was touching our internal sinkhole, and it was because of an injection attack where the attackers were running scripts and they were trying to download additional files off a dying DNS domain that we had sunk. So we're like, oh, hey, that should never happen. And in this case, the sinkhole actually worked and alerted us to something nefarious was going on. So why a sinkhole? So I kind of highlighted that from a defense standpoint. I think it's a great defensive strategy. Overall, I think it's pretty much low overhead, especially for smaller organizations. As you get bigger, you may have some scale issues, but I think overall it's very easy to maintain. At the end of my slides, I actually have a link to a SANS reading room white paper. So if you just Google SANS reading room DNS sinkhole, it's a fantastic paper that kind of walks you through all the concepts and how to actually instrument one. From a research perspective, it's a little bit different. So a lot of threat intel companies or IR vendors, what they will do is they will take over domains. They'll either get legal lawyers involved and say, hey, this domain's malicious. Here's how we know it's malicious. Let's get the registrar to basically let us take it over. In some cases, they do that for threat intel, but they also do it in some cases, for drumming up incident response business. I don't have lawyers. I don't have that capability. So I wanted to do it for research and actually see what would I find. So I wanted to do a sinkhole because, again, I think they're easy to maintain, minimal cost. You can host the infrastructure pretty cheaply in the cloud. Spin up a couple of VMs in DigitalOcean, even Amazon or Google's cloud. You can spend less than $15 and have a decent infrastructure set up. If you have development skills or even just basic log analysis and shell scripting skills, a lot of the reporting can be automated as well to make some of this triaging a lot easier. So I started this a little over a year ago. didn't know exactly what I would expect to find. When I first started thinking about doing this, again, I wanted to see what would happen if I bought different nation-state groups that I follow. What would happen if I bought their expired domains? Would I actually see any victim traffic? So I sat down and kind of came up with some hypotheses, if you will. I figured I'd see lots of DNS queries. I figured there's different systems out there that are probably set to resolve domains. I figured I'd see threat intel vendors. I'm going to lump in things like WebSense and other proxy vendors in there as well. I figured I'd see limited victim traffic. I honestly didn't think I'd see much. And I also thought I'd see just the random crap of the internet, people scanning for WordPress blogs, people scanning for port 23, all the crap, people just looking for just random stuff. So my initial findings. After about the first month, I bought a few domains, and I had no victim traffic. I had lots of DNS queries, and a couple of them were interesting. One of the domains that I bought, there was only 2 places that queried for a subdomain. So foo.badguy.com. In this case, foo was an acronym for a company. And one of the two places that was querying for that subdomain was that exact company. Doing some open source intelligence, that company had had an intrusion 6 months prior. They had stated they believed it was a Chinese threat actor, and this was a Chinese threat domain. So chances are this was the actual C2. I did some basic network analysis on the IP that was coming from. It looks like it was a resolver on their end, possibly for a SIM. I don't have any more of that other than it was just interesting to see. While I didn't see any victim traffic, I definitely see DNS queries. So my thinking is it was some sort of network defenders that had set something in their log management of their SIM, query this domain on a regular interval. If it changes, alert us in the SIM. So I was actually kind of a sad panda at this point. I was really hoping for some victim traffic. And then I kept deciding, well, this is only 3 domains, let's keep going. So I bought some more, and oh my God. The amount of beacon traffic that I started having open night was almost incredible. So when I say beacon traffic, this is malware that was on a system running and sending check-ins back to my sinkhole. So when I built out this infrastructure, I have a DNS server, I have a couple of other boxes that I point the domains to, and then I have a log aggregator on the back end. Immediately, probably within an hour of me turning on the domains, I started seeing beacons from multiple places around the world. So after that kind of got my mouth wet, like, oh yeah, let's keep going. So been doing this for 15 months now, and this is where I am today. I've purchased 68 suspected Chinese domains. Again, these are suspected Chinese operators or Chinese APT. 27 Russian and 3 Indian. Yeah, I wanted to there was a couple of Indian groups I followed, and I just wanted to see what would happen. So let's start cleaning up a little bit. Let's start with the suspected, some highlights from the Indian domains. One thing that was interesting for the 3 that I've bought, they all were in use from anywhere from 1 to 3 years, meaning the adversary was actually actively using these for this time period. 2 of them had expired 3 to 4 months before I bought them. Who here buys expired domains? Anybody? So one of the issues with buying expired domains, or even if you own your own domain, if you let it expire, you actually have 45 days after it's expired to actually buy it back. But every registrar is different. That 45 days is more of a sliding window. In some cases, I've seen it go all the way up to 60 days, which is very frustrating when you're wanting to buy something and you want to get ahead of any other researchers potentially. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. One of the other interesting things was one of these domains had been expired for 14 months. It had been sitting out there for anyone to take over, and I was actually just shocked it was out there that long. But what's been nice about this, all 3 domains, I'm getting consistent beacons, meaning I'm getting malware that's beaconing back to me on regular intervals across all 3 domains, different malware, different types of data. What's interesting geopolitically, the majority of these beacons are all from Pakistan, which if you think about it, India and Pakistan, they don't really get along, so it kind of makes sense. What's also kind of funny and sad at the same time is most of this traffic is only base 64 encoded. So easy to decode, easy to look at what's coming. And in one case, it looks, one of the pieces of malware looks to be like an auto data collector or auto data miner that looks for new documents, PowerPoints, Excels, text files, and when it finds them on a weekly interval, sends them in clear text, not encoded, just as a post with the name of the document and the actual document. So from me as a network defender, I'm like, why is this happening? This should be caught. They should be seeing this. But then me as the sinkhole operator goes, oh crap, I need to turn off PCAP analysis because I don't want some random dude's PII sitting on my boxes. So that's been some interesting highlights with the suspected Indian domains. So in this case, I've been 100%. 3 domains, 100, all of them have had beacons. Up next comes the suspected Russian ones. Unfortunately for me, majority of the domains that I've purchased have not had any victim or any beacon traffic. But I have seen a lot of things like WebSense and other vendors hitting the same URLs over and over and over, even though I reply, hey, this file's not here. I've come to the point I've almost wanted to create bind views for when it comes from different researchers and point it back at their sites. So redirect the traffic back on them. Just to see if it'll actually show up in any intelligence reports or any passive databases to kind of measure where they're getting data from. But I haven't been that ticked off yet. Only 10% of the domains, so I've bought 27 domains. We've got beacons from 3 of the domains that I've purchased. Have had beacons, all of them, well, majority of them are in Europe. One's in Belgium, 2 are in the Ukraine, and there's actually a beacon from Moscow, and it's consistent. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to gather enough data to figure out who it is within Moscow, but it is interesting to see a suspected Russian domain and a Moscow implant, or an implant that's targeting people that live within Russia. Up next is the Chinese domains. So some highlights here. By far, this has been the largest group that have been purchased, again, 67. So I have a little bit of bias here as well. Only about 25% of the purchased domains have had beacons. So right now I'm like, okay, is it really worth depending on what provider I use, the $5 to $12 every domain to keep buying Russian or Chinese domains when I'm only having a 25% success rate? I think it is. I'm also only focusing on roughly 3 to 4 different Chinese groups. But what is interesting to me is when you look at the data, there's traffic from every continent except 2, Antarctica and South America. And the chances are, if I start looking for Chinese groups that may be targeting South America, I'll probably start getting beacons. The one that really stuck out with me was Africa. China has a lot of interest in Africa, especially from like a resource potential. But in this case, all the beacons are from one country. And I started looking at why does China have interest in this one country? Well, one of the primary diplomatic partners of this country in Africa is Taiwan. And they have said they are not going to break their relationships with Taiwan. And we all know that Taiwan's number 1 and China's number 7. So please Google that. You'll thank me later. So it's just interesting to see, especially because the group that's doing this, they target typically South Pacific and Taiwan, so it makes sense that they would also target this particular country in Africa. What's also been fun about this is, especially from the Chinese domains, traffic comes in over HTTP, and some of it's straight up HTTP with posts or check-ins with encoded data. Others, it's HTTPS. Again, I've had to set up SSL certs, look at the traffic, like set up the SSL cert, then basically proxy the clear text traffic to something else so that I can capture it. We are getting DNS beacons. So in this case, it's been PlugX using DNS. And a couple of the ones we've had custom protocols. So unfortunately, we haven't actually been figuring out what the beacons are, what they look like, or what the actual data is. But we definitely see there's something custom and something we're still looking on it. But overall, there's 50 different victims, if not more, that I've lumping it together by ASNs where I can across multiple intrusion groups. So from a data perspective, I'm like, oh, this is kind of huge, this is kind of fun, but it's also starting to get to be a little bit of a nightmare for more than one person to actually manage and to try to actually reach out to people to say, hey, you have a problem. So this is a snapshot from a 30-day time period back in October and November to show all the incoming HTTP requests to my sinkhole infrastructure just for the Chinese domains. Peak was almost 60,000 requests within like an hour. So some of the malware beacons a ton, some does not. That little dip in the middle is because I was not doing proper log management and my disk filled. And for those that may be threat analysts or just like to look at what the beacon structure looks like, these are the top HTTP request URIs for the Chinese domains in that same time window. Some of this will have changed because of domains I've bought after that. Does anyone recognize any of those? Okay. The fifth one down, photos.asp, that's typically with the DeRusby implant. Multiple intrusion groups use that. There's been multiple write-ups on it. So just interesting to, again, see acquiring domains from multiple groups and seeing that across multiple groups as well. So sitting there looking at it, sometimes I feel like I'm juggling all these fun little barrels in this cleanup aisle. But I wanted to quickly go over some lessons learned. So again, waiting for domains to expire, especially ones you've really been tracking for a while and you know they're going to expire and you see they're sitting on the waiting expiration time window and the registrar is taking their sweet time. This is literally how I feel. Every day I check them and I'm like, oh, come on, please. I just want to buy this domain just so I can move on with my day. Some basics. So if anyone else is interested in doing this, one thing I would ask that you do is check who is history. Unfortunately, I have bought a couple of domains, mainly in the Russian intrusion groups, that other researchers bought prior. So they were already cleaned up, so there was no victim traffic. So just do your due diligence before you buy something. I was doing this late one night and did not do it. I'm like, oh yeah, let's buy this. And I'm like, oh, that's why I didn't get anything. Also, have good log management. As you can see in the one graph, I did not for a while. So making rotation, compression will be critical, especially depending on, even if you do this from a criminal, like a crimeware standpoint. I've done this for some crimeware stuff too, where overnight I went from no beacons to 200 different clients around the world beaconing almost 100,000 requests an hour. And my infrastructure was screaming at that point, just from a logging perspective. Again, because I was using cheap VMs in the cloud. So having good log management and being able to ingest those logs so that you can not have to store them all locally is important. I would also say network IDSs are a necessity in this case, because like when I talk about like the custom protocols or just even some of the beacons, being able to classify the traffic as it's coming in and tagging it for reporting or anything like that to say, oh, hey, here's basically if you want to write a report, here's all the IPs that have hit for this particular beacon, or we're seeing something new. Having the IDS is great for that. One thing to keep in mind though, if you're using custom rule sets or things like emerging threats or even snort rules, chances are the directions are backwards, because you're looking, typically those rules are looking for beacons leaving a network, not beacons coming into a network. So if you're like, I've got a plugx rule, I now have plugx, but you're not getting plugx alerts, change the beacon around, chances are it'll start firing. I'd also recommend a repeatable process for adding domains to the infrastructure, especially if you try to add in additional researchers or friends, because it helps if you're not the only one doing it, and it helps if you're trying to do this late at night. You may not be a little weary, so that you don't make mistakes. So the not so basics, notifications. So for anything that's been US based, I've actually reported it to law enforcement. I've made some contacts through multiple law enforcement agencies that I say, hey, I've got this data. They do the victim notifications for me. I don't have to worry about that. But anything else, I'm like, oh, I'll take a stab at it. Of all the ISPs I've reached out to, only one responded. And I think the only reason I responded to that is One of the main higher-ups within that ISP started following me on Twitter because of another presentation I did, and I DM'd him and said, hey, I'm getting ready to contact you guys because I've been seeing some traffic. He was like, yeah, put it in this email box. I'll tell them you're going to email us. And within 3 days, I had a notification. They actually told me who the victim was and said, yeah, it's actually where they were and that how they were going to fix it, which was kind of interesting. Going down to the custom protocol parsing, I am not a reverse engineer. I don't even want to imagine to be one. So in some of the cases, we have copies of the malware. That's how we decided to buy the domains. But you have to go, in some cases, we've needed a reverse engineer to figure out what the protocols are so that we can either build custom detections with snort signatures, or possibly even just being able to build a simple backend that can decode the data as it's coming in. So if you have someone that's good with the RE, I'd say, hey, maybe throw them a couple samples and see what they can do. Money. So 98 domains, roughly $10 a domain. That's almost $1,000 just in nation-state domains over the past 15 months. Thankfully, my wife is really understanding. And then just the costs of, do I want to renew these? Probably not, depending on if I'm still getting victim traffic, or if I am getting victim traffic, I'll probably keep them. But as this started to gain momentum and we started getting more traffic, I was like, I need to segment this a little bit more and not have everything on one server. So then I have to add multiple infrastructure pieces and more capability from a logging aspect. So that starts to add up some of the costs from a hosting standpoint. And then multiple sinkholes might be needed. The reason I say that is in a couple of cases, domains I bought, there were subdomains that were queried, but the beacons were a custom protocol. So I couldn't put a basic Apache listener, which would look for the host header and the port and do a log that way. It was something completely random. And trying to figure out which subdomains were doing which beacons is tough when you're all pointed to the same one or two boxes. So in some cases, I had to stand up 5 to 8 different systems and point domains at them for small amounts of time to see which systems beacon to which domains. So depending on that, depending on your infrastructure, it could start to add up and start to be costly. Again, suggested reading, if anyone's interested in doing this from a network defense standpoint, but I think a lot of the same ideas could be done from the research aspect as well. And with that, I'll open it up for any questions. Yeah?
So how long on average were any of these domains parked before they expired?
Some of them, meaning parked on like a non-routable IP or parked at pointing at 8.8.8 or wherever. Majority of them were parked. I haven't gone back to look and do a comparison, but when I spot checked some, they had all been parked probably a month or two beforehand, which is interesting considering there were still beacons. Because it makes you trying to figure out why would they park it if they're still active beacons. Maybe they didn't need to clean it up. Maybe they were retasked with something else. Who knows? Just interesting. Yeah.
Where do you draw the line between gathering some information about these beaconings and actually interacting with them? Like if you're doing custom protocols, there's some...
So my thought process on it is no custom interaction at all because of different laws and different, like if let's just say there's a beacon from Germany and the data ends up on my system, I really don't want to have any interactions. I don't want to be able to send kill commands, anything like that. I want to be able to at least open up the data and see what commands it's trying to gather or issue. Or send back to me, but I do not want to be able to issue any commands. I don't want to have that looming over my head.
So when you said one beacon just brought back a whole bunch of data from the victim.
Yep.
They just were sending it to you.
Yep. So the malware was configured for auto exfiltration.
Oh, okay.
So what it's doing is it says, oh, hey, there's a new Word doc, a new PowerPoint. I'm going to exfil it at this time on this day. And I started looking through all the data. I'm like, holy crap. In this case, I had a lot more data to the point where I had the person's email address, had his LinkedIn profile, all sorts of fun stuff. Well, I feel sad. I haven't reached out to that guy yet because I really don't know how to go about saying, hey, I have all your data. It's not something I really want to do, especially when they may not have a good relation with us right now. Yeah?
Did you run into any registering the SSL search or any beacons talking back
Yes, there was one particular implant where one particular victim where everything was SSL encrypted, and once I stood up it wasn't validating the SSL cert. Once I stood up a generic one, it didn't have to match the domain at all. It would just send the traffic, create the TLS handshake, then I'd pop open the data. Yep. Last question.
Can you actually incorporate yourself to that way so this stuff is not like all on you?
No, I haven't. Again, I just thought it's a side research project. I didn't think it would get to this scope, honestly. If I continue doing it, I may do that or do some sort of nonprofit and do it that way. That way, if people want logs, I can figure out a way to share it with them. Cool, thanks.